Okay, while we get settled, we're going to get started just because we have that hard constraint of a webcast speech by Kailash Satyarthi, and we've got an hour to have a very stimulating discussion. So as I said, we just went through a panel on just science for science sake in some sense, and had the privilege of a very diverse set of scientists working in very diverse fields, which was kind of fun to hear. This second panel is titled Science, AI, and Social Impact. We've got a lot of focus on AI in this case, but I'd like us to think about, and Project Prakash, which ended the previous panel, was a lovely, obvious illustration of social impact as well, so it blends nicely. We'll go in the order that the panelists are listed. The bios again are in this, so I'm not gonna belabor them. This is not as diverse a set of universities as the last panel was. Here we're concentrated at Princeton and Harvard, but be that as it may. We'll have Sanjeev, then Milind, Arvind, and finally Sheila. Each of us will take about 10 minutes to introduce the slides, and then we'll hopefully have some time for Q&A and discussion and things like that. So without further ado, Sanjeev, you want to go first?
Okay. Thank you. Hi. I'm Sanjeev Arora, and I direct a unit here at Princeton that was created in the last year called Princeton Language and Intelligence. So nobody here probably needs an introduction to generative AI. All these, I'm actually not sure. I can't click on individual things, right? That's fine. No. Everybody's seen these things like the videos and the fact that you can create new objects to specification of in diverse fields, including medicines and climate forecasts and so on. And I wanted to say a little bit technical things because, that's my research. And I think the technical underpinnings really will drive the conversation. So so I just wanted to emphasize some salient aspects of this technology. So a driving force in this is something called language models, as you know. And I want to emphasize that most people think of them as, that they predict the next word. And that's the way experts indeed used to think of them until a couple of years ago. So as in, you give the model a piece of text, like Rob went to the cafe and ordered a blank, and the model can produce a probability of the next word, like latte and Danish. And one famous paper even derisively called such models stochastic parrots, because they are trained on this task on a bunch of text scraped from the internet. But language models in the last 2 years have come a far distance from this simplistic view. So firstly, of course, they have general purpose skills. They are pretty good programmers, and they are able to do math at some level, maybe high school level, science. Their text capabilities are amazing. I think that's where they are strongest, but they're also able to do image, audio, video understanding. This is the next important part. This stereotype of predicting the next word, that's all, these are stochastic parrots, is over. There's a complicated multi-stage training, proprietary details not completely released, but can be inferred from some papers, etc., that AI is used to select text or generate synthetic training text. Sorry, there's a typo there. And the development cost is huge. They have tremendous capability to learn new things on the fly. So for example, this has been done, that suppose you have a phrase book of some rare language, which we have reasons to believe was not in the training set. You input that phrase book, which is not a lot of words, and the model can extend from that phrase book to a much more fuller understanding of the language. And that's those kinds of, this kind of learning on the fly from very little data is very powerful. And which is why there are all these new and urgent discussions that, frankly, felt like science fiction even 2 or 3 years ago, that there'll be a lot of societal and economic progress as well as disruption. And there's even talk of emergence of artificial general intelligence, which would be comparable to humans in most tasks. So all those things, as you saw, the development cost is huge. It's unclear what, and even just deployment cost is huge. But the reason there's hope for economies like India is this foundation model paradigm, which drives all this. That yes, the language model may take a lot of resources to develop, but once it's developed, you can cheaply modify it using other types of data. So you fine tune on legal text, and you get something like a legal model that can advise you on legal matters. Fine tune on medical data, you get a kind of a medicine model, math model, etc. And this is where there'll be an ecosystem, AI ecosystem, and we'll return to this. The next thing I want to emphasize from a technical angle is this phenomenon that bigger models, as far as we can tell, are better with current training. So so it was discovered, these are called scaling laws. These are empirical observations, that as you scale up the model with respect to amount of compute, or the size, or the amount of training data, these are all related, and they all add to the cost. The error at their native task of predicting the next word goes down, and this is on a log scale. And that, if you think of it as a stochastic pair, it doesn't seem to matter so much, but it's been observed that these lead to new skills. And actually, with a colleague, we had this paper last year, which says that mathematically, this scaling phenomenon implies the emergence of complex skills. So this means that the ability, so if there are some basic skills, which every model knows, even the tiny ones, the larger models are able to combine those basic skills to solve a new task. And furthermore, mathematically, this also implies that it's able to combine skills in a way it has not seen in the training data. Okay, so that suggests that larger models have a lot more utility. And of course, they are also more expensive to create and more energy costs and all that. So there are implications for society here. For instance, benefits may flow to resource-rich institutions and countries. Like this stereotype we have, you just scrape text from the internet and train a model. You don't get a very good model. You don't get GPT-4. And so there's a lot of issues about having resources, manpower, the data. They're spending large amounts of money on data now. So there's that. Winner-take-all phenomenon will be stronger in AI. And maybe everybody else will have to buy AI subscription to a few top AI models. But the hope is that there's a lot of innovation going on even in the past year, and maybe smaller models will be more powerful. And in the Indian context, we'll rely on that. So finally, we may unlock the power of computers for the masses, PhonePe AI, PhonePe Sarkar. There'll be an ecosystem of AI apps because of this foundation model paradigm for all kinds of things. Lowered language barriers. Translation is very, very good. Expanded access to instruction and tutoring, even higher education. Actually, I'm curious, how many people here use language models on a reasonably daily basis? So not so many. They're incredibly useful to enhance your own productivity. And they'll be upskilling across many professions, and that'll be great. Ironically, may increase outsourcing in the tech sector, which may benefit India for various reasons. And the reasons for worry, this is nothing possibly new, given the discourse in newspapers, further shift of power to elites, centralized control, potentially, it's possible, cost of AI. Okay, so I'll leave you with these two takeaways. Oh, sorry, I forgot to change this. Sorry, the slide. It wasn't the AI hub. Anyway, it'll be hugely influential in India as well. And yeah, sorry about that.
Thanks, Sanjeev. We'll go to Milind.
All right. Okay, so for the past 15 years or so, my team and I have been focused on using AI for social impact, focusing on topics of public health, conservation, and public safety and security. Key challenge is how to optimize our limited intervention resources. So let me just give you a quick overview of our previous work before jumping to the main topic. With respect to public health, we have large populations to serve limited number of public health resources. So concrete example is work we've done with youth experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, harnessing the social networks of these youth. We are able to show that our influence maximization algorithms, ones that figure out who are the right influencers, are far more effective in reducing HIV risk behaviors compared to traditional approaches. With respect to conservation, we have large conservation areas to protect limited number of ranger resources. So concrete example is work we've done in Uganda and Cambodia. Harnessing past poaching data, we are able to predict where poachers set traps or snares, and for the past several years, have been able to remove thousands of these traps. With respect to public safety and security, we've contributed new game theoretic algorithms that have been used by security agencies in the United States, like the Federal Air Marshals, the US Coast Guard, and others. So since 2009, if you are on a US air carrier internationally, whether there's an air marshal or not, is our code at work trying to figure that out in many cases. So today I'm very excited to tell you about the work we've been doing in maternal and child health. So this is with world's two largest mobile health programs. One of them is in Mumbai called Mitra with 200,000 mothers enrolled at a time. And the second work just beginning in Kilkari, which is an all-India program where 3 million mothers are enrolled at a time. The motivation, of course, is the maternal health crisis. The UN Sustainable Development Goal says that the maternal mortality rate, mothers dying during childbirth or soon after, should be below 70 per 100,000 live births. But if you look at where we are today in India, the numbers are double the UN target. So we've been very fortunate to be working with a nonprofit called Arman that's active in 20 states in India, works with 41 million mothers. And we have several projects with them, but the one that we started with is called Mitra. This is a program for new or expecting mothers. So from the time the mother enrolls to the baby being 1 year old, there's a weekly 2-minute automated health message in the local language that goes out. Something like this small snippet of one of the messages: for you and your baby to be strong, you need lots of iron. It goes on and on. There's 141 such messages that get delivered to the mothers from the time they register to the baby being 1 year old. As I said, over 2 million mothers have benefited from this program. And Arman has shown in randomized control trials that mothers who listen to these messages versus who don't have a 30% increase in infants with tripled birth weight at the end of the year and other benefits to the mother and the baby. So where do we come in? Unfortunately, 30 to 40% of these beneficiaries, these mothers, enroll, but then they become low listeners or drop out of the program. So what can we do? There's a limited intervention resource. So in this example, Arman has this service call center from where they can give live service calls to these mothers to try to persuade them to not drop out of the program. The thing is, there's a large population to serve. The live service calls can only go out to a small number of people. So there's large number of beneficiaries, 200,000. Automated health messages go out to each and every one of these beneficiaries every week. But we can only give 1,000 live service calls. And the question is, which 1,000 out of the 200,000 to give live service calls to, so as to maximize the total number of health messages that are listened to. And just to sort of explain the complexity of why this is difficult, consider this illustrative example where there's a single health worker, 5 mothers under her care, 4 shown in red, have not listened to a health message, 1 shown in green has. And she has to decide 2 mothers to call this week. Supposing she calls the first 2, this is good. They turn to green, 1 other mother turns to green, starts listening to the health messages. Now next week, who do you call? If you call the 2 in red, this might be a very bad choice because the 2 in red don't turn to green, and in fact, those who are in green also turn to red. The point is that in choosing the 1,000 beneficiaries, a live service call may not change a beneficiary state, and beneficiaries may be changing state on their own. So the way we solve these problems is called a restless bandit. That's a way of prioritizing 1,000 out of the 200,000 beneficiaries each week. Obviously, I'm not going to have time, given this interdisciplinary audience, to get into the details. But just to give you a quick flavor, each mother is modeled as what's called a mark-out decision problem, where basically the mother might be in a bad state or a good state. We can act by giving a service call or not. And we represent the behaviors of the mothers as probabilities, going from a bad state to good state, is high at 0.8 if we give a service call, and low at 0.2 if you don't give a service call. Okay, so there's a lot of algorithmic work that went into figuring out how well this would work, and machine learning to figure out these transition probabilities, all of that. At the end of it, we ran a study with 23,000 beneficiaries, first large-scale application of these bandits for restless bandits for public health. Divided these into 3 groups of 7,667 each. Restless bandit group, a round-robin group, and current standard of care. Remember, all beneficiaries each week get an automated health message no matter what. What changes is who gets a service call. 225 live service call per week for 7 weeks. In the restless bandit group, it's the algorithm choosing the 225. In the round robin group, it's the first 225, the next 225, etc. In the current standard of care, no messages go out because that's the current standard of care. And now we want to know how many more health messages are listened to compared to the current standard of care in each of these groups. And over 7 weeks, cumulatively, on the y-axis is how many more health messages are listened to. And we can see that with the round-robin group, there is hardly any improvement over the current standard of care. But with the restless bandit group, the AI group, there's 600 more messages that are listened to. The point here is that it is important to optimize these live service calls. If you just call people in round-robin fashion, there's hardly any improvement in their listening. And we can show that this restless bandits group approach cuts by 32% the drop-off rate over the current standard of care. So after this initial study, there have been a lot more improvements, refinements, and so forth. At the end of it, we built a system called Saheli, which is restless bandits deployed with Arman. Of course, Saheli means a friend in Hindi, but it's also an acronym. This is just to tell you, work incredibly hard to come up with a good acronym. So number of beneficiaries it has served, it's been in use since April 2022. It has served over 330,000 mothers. It's prevented 30% of drop-offs from samples that we've done. And for bottom 25 percentile of listeners, the content exposure is more than doubled. That means more information about iron and calcium, taking calcium supplements and so on has gone on. So Neha Madiwala, who's the research director at Arman, points out this AI model has been far more effective. It has been very effective in identifying women experiencing exceptional difficulties like miscarriages and so on, and prioritizing them for service calls. In another paper written by some other research group, they've shown that this leads to improvement in the call center worker satisfaction because they can then direct these mothers who are experiencing difficulties to counseling services. We've done a follow-on study to look at health benefits. Higher listenership has led to improved health behaviors. With survey of 15 questions, we saw that this leads to improved knowledge of taking care of self and baby. So, and a longer study is going on. So Dr. Hegde, in this YouTube video, if you wanted to see AI for social good in partnership with Arman, points out that we are able to reach out to more and more women each week and get them back into the fold and save lives because of AI. There's a small video. I don't know if it'll play. We'll see. Okay, that goes next.
मी तो फोन नव्हते ऐकत पहिला त्याच्यानंतर मला त्या ताईंचा कॉल आला त्या घरी आल्या मला समजवलं हा कॉल घ्यायला पाहिजे तुझ्या पोरांसाठी चांगला आहे हा मग तेव्हा मी कॉल घ्यायला लागले आणि ते कॉल ऐकून खूप बरं वाटतं की कोणीतरी घरचंच मला कोणीतरी समजवायला येतंय मग जसं ते कॉल ऐकते मी तसंच मी माझ्या पोरगीचं संगोपन करते.
So, having grown up in Mumbai, having this Marathi-speaking mother talking about benefit to her and her baby, it's really satisfying. So, our next step is working on AI for maternal and child care with Khilkari. This is the world's largest mobile health program for maternal and child health. It's run by India's Ministry of Health and Welfare. Arman is in charge of scaling this up, and we are working with Arman for a similar problem of trying to prevent drop-offs. We've done simulation studies, and now we're waiting for the next steps, which is to do field tests and scaling this up to other parts of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Milan. We're doing really well on time.
I walked over here as if I have slides, but I actually don't. Good morning, everyone. My name is Arvind Narayanan. I'm a professor of computer science here and director of the Center for Information Technology Policy. So I work on understanding the societal effects of AI. And what I'd like to briefly talk about today is how Indian scientists and technologists can approach AI, especially people who are getting into this field for the first time. And I want to talk about research and development and deployment, all stages of the AI lifecycle. The US has had some head start in AI, and so I think we can learn from that experience. A lot of things have gone right, but some things have gone wrong. So how can India reap the benefits while avoiding the pitfalls? If we look at the trend over the last few decades in the US, it has often been bemoaned by the academic sector that it has become harder and harder to do AI research in academia, and it's more and more important to be in a big company because of the need for computational resources. Sanjeev emphasized how important compute is and the need for data and so on. So is it going to be similar in India? Is there hope for academia? Or do Indians who want to participate in AI have to join a big tech company, most of which do have a presence in India, so that's good. But nonetheless, it would be better if there were many routes for participating in AI. And what about Indian companies? What about startups who might not have the same level of resources? So when generative AI came along, when these models started getting bigger and bigger, people assumed that this trend was going to get even worse, that it was going to be really essential to be in one of these tech companies who are spending, on the order of $1 billion or more on training these enormous models. But something interesting has happened in the past year. The model layer itself has matured a little bit. We have these leading foundation models, and certainly new ones are regularly being released, but it's not, at least in the experience of the last year so far, this might change in the future, it's not quite the revolution every 3 months that people assumed at one point it would be. A lot of the action has shifted to the layer above the foundation models themselves. And I think, Sanjeev, you alluded to this a little bit. So building apps on top of these foundation models, doing research on top of these foundation models that take the model itself as a given. Of course, it remains important to do research on the models themselves and to build new models. However, I would say the majority of the activity has shifted over to this layer, and people working on that layer don't have to be building these models at a big tech company. They can use one of the models, and all of these models are available through APIs, through programming interfaces for anyone to use at a fairly low cost. And so this has led to the surprising effect of AI researchers actually leaving big tech companies at it depends on how you measure it, but at an almost unprecedented rate. And qualitatively, when we hear what top AI researchers are saying, there seems to be a growing number saying this is the best time to do research outside a big tech company on AI, whether it's in academia or startups or something like that. So that is a note of optimism that I wanted to start on. And one other thing you mentioned, Sanjeev, is that these foundation models can be fine-tuned to the legal domain or the medical domain or the financial domain. That is true. One thing we've found out over the last year is that that is much harder than we originally assumed. So, it takes a lot more people working on adapting AI to these various areas, having domain expertise, than building the models themselves. And that work can happen outside big tech companies. And so there's a democratization effect from this, I think. AI is becoming accessible to more people. At the same time, paradoxically, there's also a concentration effect, which again, Sanjeev mentioned. So that more people are using AI and building things on top of AI and researching AI, but all of these activities rely on these foundation models that are primarily provided by somewhere between 3 to 5 companies, depending on how you count. So those companies are getting enormously rich. So it's a paradoxical effect. Concentration is a problem. It is something we should try to mitigate, but at the same time, we can take advantage of the democratization that is happening. Okay, the second thing I wanted to mention is a lot of the work that goes into AI is research and engineering, the kind of thing I've been talking about, but a lot of the work that happens is invisible work. People who are annotating the data that is used to train these AI models. Now, some of the data, actually most of the data that is used to train these models does not need to be looked at by a person or annotated. However, there is a step called fine-tuning, which does involve human effort, and it turns out to be a lot of human effort. And very often, this work is about figuring out what is inappropriate for AI models to generate and to train the models to avoid those outputs. So this is text that is, full of gore and violence or otherwise inappropriate or insulting. This could be images that are inappropriate in various different ways, and in some cases, filtering the training data that goes into the models, looking at images of beheading and other horrible things that are on the web and making sure that kind of training data doesn't go into building these image generators. So who does that work? The leading AI companies are in the US. However, they outsource all that work to people in developing countries, places like Kenya, India as well a little bit. And the working conditions for that group of data annotators are not very good. They're pretty horrific. There have been many exposés in the press. So first of all, the wages are low. That in itself is not necessarily a big problem. The wages are commensurate with what those workers might make in other local jobs. However, the nature of this work is particularly trauma-inducing, and a lot of these folks need mental health support because of the kind of data that they're looking at for 10 hours per day. It's not only that, there are really no kind of benefits or stability that come with these jobs because the nature of AI training, you might need a lot of data annotation for 3 months while you're building a model, and then you're done, and then all those workers have nothing to do, right? So, and because there is so much secrecy around this, companies don't tell workers their plans ahead of time. So all of these millions of workers are in a position where they wake up in the morning and they don't know if they're going to have a job that day or not. And so there's been a lot of concern over this. OpenAI is being sued in Kenya, for instance. There are efforts to change this. Karya is a nonprofit in Karnataka, which is taking a very different approach to this. They pay a lot more, and workers get to keep control of the data, and they work in local languages, so the work they do helps train AI in Kannada and other local languages. So this is a very good model. We need more like this. But as you can imagine, a company that's treating workers fairly is at a competitive disadvantage compared to other companies that pay very low wages. And so I think the market alone will not solve this problem. Some policy is needed, collective action is needed, some sort of intervention is needed. So very quickly, the third point I wanted to make is that in an area that's as full of hype and buzz as AI is, there's obviously a lot of great, genuine innovation going on. But I think there are also many products that don't live up to the hype. There is, in fact, flat out snake oil, I will say. And one example of snake oil, and by the way, I have a book called AI Snake Oil coming out with my co-author, Sayash Kapoor, where we go into detail on a lot of this. Again, the point is not that AI is snake oil, but certain applications of AI are marketed as doing a lot more than they're actually capable of. And one example of this is trying to predict who will commit a crime. And, it's bizarre that this is so widely adopted in the US. Of course, we understand that we can't predict the future, but this kind of pre-crime is being used in the majority of states. Defendants who come before the criminal justice system might be awaiting trial for years, and during that time, should they be set free or should they be in jail? It's usually data-driven algorithms that are making that decision. And, how good are these algorithms? Can they actually predict who will commit a crime? Well, it turns out not so much. You can look at the data on this, and it's usually measured in terms of AUC is one way of measuring accuracy. And the accuracy of these models are somewhere between 65% and 70%. And 50% is random guessing, right? So these are slightly better than random. And in our research, we've looked at this, and even that might be a big overestimate. There are things like distribution shift, where a model trained in one area doesn't work well in another area. So the actual correctness of these models that are only slightly more than 50%, and people's freedom is decided based on an AI prediction that's only slightly better than the toss of a coin. There's been a lot of concern about the racial bias in these models. I think that's a legitimate issue, but to some extent, it's missing the point. These are not fair to anyone, black or white or Indian or whoever it is. So that's one example of AI snake oil. I think there are a few other ones. So I think India should learn from the experience of the US and avoid rushing too quickly to deploy AI in areas where it's actually not able to do a good job. It doesn't matter if you're using language models, foundation models, whatever. We just can't predict what a person will do in the future. beyond looking at fairly crude statistical patterns. And so not all AI is the same. We should think carefully about which types of AI we are deploying, whether that's compatible with a democracy, what sorts of guardrails we're putting around it, et cetera. So those are the three thoughts I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Well, Darren is very good at giving people also impossible assignments, and he claims he's making this up on the fly. So, of course, my job was to finish off this morning's remarkable presentations, also to some degree making it up on the fly. My training is not in any of the technical fields that you've heard represented by the 7, I guess, other people who've preceded me, but rather from the humanities and the social sciences, and it's in that sense, therefore, a kind of commentary on the things I've been hearing, not just today, but also yesterday, and also from my personal location in this thing called in diaspora, or however you pronounce it. I arrived in this country when the numbers that you saw from Devesh Kapoor were at the lowest end. So somewhere between where he showed like 1,000 plus people coming in the 50s and 6,000 or whatever in the mid 60s, I'm kind of more towards the 1,000-person end. In terms of getting a PhD, I was closer to the 3 digits getting PhDs in America than the 5 digits or whatever that you see now. And the imagination or vision with which my father brought us to this country was the return vision. So there was a commodity, education. Then, as now, it was recognized that this was a value added in the West that was not available in India. In particular, it was not because of me so much as because of my brother, who was already emerging as a very talented mathematician. And the principal of his school, Cathedral in Mumbai, or then Bombay, said that there was no way that he was going to be able to get the training needed, and therefore he should come to America to be educated. And the 2 daughters were younger, so they followed in the trail of the big brother, the father's decision-making, okay? So, there was that sense. But the idea was that this learning, whatever we were going to get, was going to be brought back to India. And of course, that vision has not stayed, and Devesh Kapoor's numbers were very interesting from the standpoint of who goes back and basically who does not, and it's everybody does not. But the reasons why my little tranche of a generation stayed had little or nothing to do with money and earning possibilities, and not the lure of Silicon Valley. It had to do with the thing that my father didn't get, which was that you take children at a determinative stage in their lives and you put them in a different context. And what it emerges is a different kind of subjectivity, a different kind of human being. And I think that dimension has been, to some degree, buried in the discussions that we've been having here so far. So one thing that I'm struck by, and this is something I've been struck by for quite a long time, is that the generosity of vision with which Indian origin technocrats approach the world is actually somewhat different from America. I mean, so everybody in America is concerned about race. I don't need to tell you about DEI programs. I mean, any of us who are in academia see that, but it's usually couched in terms of race, whereas I think the Indian vision is, on the whole, a more democratic one. And one of the things that has come up repeatedly today and yesterday is that whatever people think for humanity is, it involves a numbers game. So scale up faster or for larger numbers. And, I'm reminded of a meeting that I myself helped organize in Bangalore earlier this year, and it was about genome editing and the first application of it to sickle cell disease, which is a very sort of Western preoccupation anyway, but there's sickle cell in India that people don't know as much about. And the person who was speaking about it said that his concern was not the first person who had been cured, that in fact he wouldn't even think of this as a cure until the cost was brought down enough that it would really get to the bedsides of a lot of people. And he was asked, what are you talking about in terms of numbers? And he said, when the numbers reduce to the level of a full bone marrow transplant, only then would he consider the cure, really a cure. I mean, so not the moment of the scientific breakthrough. And what my co-panelists have talked about, particularly with the cheapening of the foundation models getting saturated in some sense, and, then cheaper applications being built, it comes out of the same spirit that the thing isn't a thing till you bring the cost down. And even the celebration of ISRO, I would submit, is built on a vision of that sort, that we do it better. But why do we do it better? Partly because it's orders of magnitude cheaper. Somebody has said that it costs more to produce the movie Gravity than to land the rocket on the moon, and that it is independently a cause for celebration. And I think it is in some sense. But what I want to say is that the vision, the goal, the end point is still coming from somewhere else. So we do it better, cheaper, maybe quicker, but the it is not an Indian it. And that, I think, is a thing that we should stop and think about. So yesterday's music performance, to me, represented a different kind of spirit. So when different traditions from different parts of India were showcased, and their merger, their sort of synthesizing was one of the pieces of originality that our young performers brought. What would it take to have that sort of vision? So I don't think we can run India's history forward from 1947 and pretend that that's all it is. One of the reasons I think this community has the cohesion and the vision it has is that we are all aware that that is not what India is. There are thousands and thousands of years before that. So why, when we get into talking about prosperity, development, growth, is the vision suddenly something that runs on the back of what has been generated somewhere else? Yes, one should get healthcare to everybody, and it should be foundational. But when we were hearing yesterday that there's only one country of the rich countries that has not adopted universal healthcare as a mandate, why are all the Indians settling in that country, and why are they all flocking to California to become Californians? There is a set of political battles to be fought that are very different for India and in India. As somebody who has tried to remember that and to cross borders as much as possible, I note that Indians, unlike West Europeans, cannot have dual citizenship. We are not as free to cross borders back and forth. These days, you even have to worry about your OCI status, depending on, what are you going to do. So can a full-blown historical, cultural, ethical integration of who we are as South Asians with a long history of our own come about together with the novel technologies and capabilities of the present, unless we also fight for other things, other forms of integration, other forms of holding up our heads in a different sort of way, and not merely because we've taken the latest, greatest innovation from the S&T worlds of the North and the West and managed to make them more accessible. I am totally in favor of accessibility. That is not what I'm decrying. I'm talking about what else is needed. So I will conclude by saying that my most popular article, for whatever strange reason, is called Technologies of Humility. In it, I mostly talk about Western technologies of prediction and why they so often fail. And what I have put forward in that article is a different way of looking at things. But what people who read it in the West, it's popular because something about the title Technologies of Humility resonates with a lot of people, including a lot of, indigenous Americans, let's say. What they don't know is that they focus on the technologies in the title, Technologies of Humility. What I think is the humility side. And for me, humility is inflected with my Bengali heritage. So what I think is Amar matha নত করে দাও হে তোমার চরণ ধুলার তলে. And that kind of integration, most people cannot achieve until we, this community, looks for a different world in which the goals, the aims, the histories are embraced in a holistic way, which India seems to be abandoning at the moment. And I think that is the spirit that we need to get back to. And from my admittedly odd, immigration history into this country as a non-immigrant who nevertheless stayed, I urge you to adopt a little bit of the ethos of my generation as you move forward.
Great. That was terrific. Let me just make one or two comments, and then we can open it up and have at least 10 minutes of discussion. Sheila's admonition is a wonderful one. Just to restate it my simple-minded way, what I think she's saying is that what we're doing is fine, but it's far too limited in vision in some ways, and that there is far more that civilizations as old and complex and sophisticated as ours can bring to the table than simply take scientific advances and focus much more on the accessibility. That's a particular reason why I really liked Pawan's work in the previous segment, because as you remember in the Venn diagram that he put up in his very first slide, it was about the intersection of basic science by leveraging some contextual reality in India. So that it's not either or. It's not just application, it's not just pure science, but it's a lovely consonance, if you will, of two different things. And I want to believe that there are plenty more of this. Just a data point that occurred to me, Sheila, while you were speaking, and we have people here who are closer to the pharmaceutical industry than am I. I'm not at all. But I read somewhere, I think in Science or Nature, one of these technical journals, that a good 80% of drugs that you find in CVS today originate ultimately from some natural process. You have some CDC connection, right? He's nodding, so I'm viewing that as affirmation. And when you think about the amount of biodiversity that's sitting around in the Amazon or anywhere else, or in our parts of the world, those are entirely untapped. They show up as natural remedies and so on in different places, but there's really no reason why with genome sequencing, by the way, on a per unit basis is progressing far faster than even Moore's law. To go back to the graph that Kaushik, I think, put up, far faster, like logarithmically faster. So if Moore's law could give us all these things we're carrying around in our pocket, I don't think you can begin to imagine what genome sequencing will next 15, 20 years in some ways. But if you just think about that juxtaposition of the cost of genome sequencing going down so rapidly, vast cornucopias, 95% of nature's bounty entirely untapped, but completely amenable to sequencing in a way that privileges indigenous know-how in biodiverse regions and provides medication and so on. It's another example of the confluence that Pawan was talking about and that Sheila's admonition directs us to. Let me see if anybody else wants to. On the AI front, again, to connect back to Sheila, I was just thinking of, in India, we have Bhashini now. Are you guys familiar with Bhashini? Bhashini is the attempt to, yesterday we had a keynote speaker in the afternoon, Pramod Verma, who is the CTO of Aadhaar, the biometric ID in India, and then the so-called India stack that's been built up on top of it. And that has been leveraged. I know Nandan Nilekani was showing me to something called Bhashini, which is, I don't know if anybody else knows. Do you know about this? No. Do you know about Bhashini? So it's basically, you can tap into indigenous languages, hundreds of languages now, on the fly using large language models. But I can't imagine that that's not going to unlock all sorts of cultural heritage, literatures, languages, and so on in different ways. So it's another example where we can see the connection to the civilizational cornucopia that we're sitting on and is currently untapped. I'll end my mini diatribe with that. And let me see if I can open it up and let's take 3 questions and then ask the panelists to come in. I know you have the privilege of the chair, so.
All right, well, thank you for a wonderful panel. I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about both what Sheila said and what Devesh presented. And I was really, it resonated, the remarks you made, that when you come here, you become a different person because you're in a different culture. And part of the reason I feel, when we talked about, Devesh talked about higher education in India, is some of the freedom of thinking, originality, creativity, and even being iconoclastic, going against the grain isn't appreciated as much because it's fairly hierarchical. And this also relates to, we talked about women in STEM. There are very few women in STEM or anything else that are very, very successful in India, but the same women can come here. So what is that quality? And you spoke a little bit, Priya talked about, the structure of the German model but it's also something beyond that. And I just want to put that out there, that there is, the culture of hierarchy and knowledge and wisdom versus this very young people coming up, breaking the mold and doing innovation, but also activists, we talked about social integration. So I just want to keep that thought. And then the second comment that I wanted to, why don't I stop with that? But the second comment I really wanted to make was, as we think about this more humanistic vision, of people coming together, and often when I go to India, there's now the sense that we can develop appropriate technologies for us. We don't need the Western model. And I think there's some truth to that. And so it doesn't have to be a one directional flow. There's sort of different innovations coming up, and it could be bi-directional.
Thank you so much. Amazing panel as this whole conference has been. I have a targeted question for a nice question for Professor Narayan, and then a general question. So the AI's use in determining whether somebody gets a bail application will be either a flight risk or a danger to society. So judges have a hard time determining that as well. And so I'm wondering if you've compared, the judges' determinations, which is normally done, compared to the AI, and whether, AI could be used just as a way to inform that or a second that. So maybe the data, and maybe the larger question is, so I'm working on a project, a long-term project on access to justice for women in particularly in Punjab, and we're doing research on what are the issues and what are the needs. And I'm wondering how to utilize AI as a way, it'll be a small data set about what we figure out what the problems are, but use it as an app to help women navigate the legal system. And again, connecting to the larger point, maybe Professor Jasanoff, I think for me, it's all the work I do in India is always about hybrid and using local technologies and local knowledge, because I need to know what the problems are in India for law, and then use the AI technology to help solve it, whether it's from the US or from India. So just a comment on that. Thank you.
At the back, there's a gentleman there, his hand was up, and then the lady in the middle here. Yeah. Then we'll get comments from the panelists. Please keep the question short, if you don't mind. Yeah.
So mine is not a question. I'm Prakash Satwani. I'm professor at Columbia University. What I say is science without access is science fiction. As Sheila was talking about gene therapy costs $3 million in US. And over the last 5 years, I've been conducting bone marrow transplants. And in Madhya Pradesh, the cost of bone marrow transplant is $10,000, which is $500,000 to $1 million in US. And a lot of things can be done in India at very, very cheaper cost. What we do in America is out of control crazy. But things can be very simple. With my minimalistic setup, the outcomes are as good as what we have in US. So I think a lot more doctors and scientists have to persevere to advance the care in India. Thank you.
Lady here had a hand up here.
Thank you so much. I'm Charu Nair, and I was a professor at Merrillhurst University in Oregon and a few others for a decade. My work, my passion is the humanities where it meets technologies in ancient civilizations, which India is one. And I see a kind of a real reawakening, a reclamation, so to speak. And I'd be really curious to talk more with you to embrace this deep, wide, and I believe that I think India is going to be crucial to the world's kind of understanding of application of some of these new technologies. And my kind of three concentrations of being an army brat and seeing India up close in my formative years, then moving across the world and seeing Asia really close and AIM, and then now establishing the World Trade Center and working with the UN now. But I deeply resonate, and I cannot put it in the same beautiful way that you do. And that gets my heartbeat going, and that's my passion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me ask the panelists if anybody want to comment on any part of the discussion so far. Sanjeev, anything?
I think it was a question for Arvind.
Okay, sure. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I can offer maybe a very brief answer to that. Certainly in this domain and others, AI might be bad at prediction, but better than humans. And to clarify, the point is not that judges should be making predictions about who will commit a crime. No one should be making predictions about who will commit a crime. That should not be the basis for denying someone's freedom. And, the bail reform movement has a lot to say on this, so I'd be happy to get into that offline. But the concern was about predictions in the first place, not about human AI comparison.
We have a student with a question, so please, you have privileged position.
Thank you so much. My name is Niranjana. I'm an artist and entrepreneur. I loved listening to you speak. My question is, who or what gives you hope that a more holistic vision is being represented?
Is that a question for Sheila? Or yeah, okay.
Yes.
So that's you.
Well, you do. My favorite teaching interactions are with my undergraduates, and then also with that small band of undergraduates whom I've inveigled into becoming my graduate students. So there is a pipeline, there is a way up. But the students do not come in siloed into disciplines, and that's one of the beauties of actually being able to talk to them. But if you extend that up and say that we all have the possibility of becoming students, if we only opened ourselves up to a greater diversity of inputs and perspectives, so that is something I would say. On the law and judges point, it's such a truism that, the judge makes a different decision depending on whether it's before breakfast or after lunch, and therefore the AI, which does not vary as to food inputs, would be a better thing to do. But, there's two mandates in the law. One is to treat like cases alike, which the AI might be good at doing. But the other is the Merchant of Venice point, mercy seasoning justice, and it's the compassion point. And that is something, so the day after, is it 2 days after now? Anyway, O.J. Simpson's death, and reading in great detail about what was already known about the domestic abuse history of that situation and how the legal system did not actually respond to that. It responded to the DNA. So breaking the chain of custody proved to be enough for the jury to override the domestic abuse case, which was equally strong, if not stronger. So how would an AI have dealt with that? It's worth thinking about. And then, Anu, your point about the gender thing. Of course, this is something I have experienced full on and still continue to do all the time. So I was the 5th ever tenured member of the Kennedy School faculty at Harvard in 1998, and the 3 of the 4 others had also been appointed in the 96 to 98 period. So that means that the School of Public Policy at Harvard University did not really become aware of gender at the level of giving tenure to women until the turn of the century. So, what are we talking about? And, my father never hesitated. I was told that our neighbors in Scarsdale asked him why he was sending his daughter to Harvard. For my father, it was never an issue. I was going to be educated in the same way as my brother. It was never an issue. So in between the disparities that Devesh and other people have talked about, I think there is also a model of the woman in Indian society, which I have experienced as being different from the model of women in American society. It's one of the places where I think a translation and, the sort of picking the relatively better features of each one is something that I would advocate. I mean, certainly I am not, a product of American feminism. That's one thing I can pretty categorically say I am not. And am I a product of Indian feminism? Maybe, yes, more so.
On that, are we out of time? Yes, I think Anu, my boss, told me we're out of time. But we're going to mill around outside and grab a quick lunch. And I think we have to come back by 12 o'clock, sorry, not 1. So 20 minutes to grab lunch. Please join me in thanking the panelists.